This talk is really about how you split up shares and thinking about splitting up shares when you found a company. Um, the first thing, which I think many people don't realize, is they don't understand how shares are acquired. So you buy shares in an early stage company. When you found a company and you have 50% of the shares, um, you can't be given that 50% of the shares. You actually will put money into the company's bank account in return for those shares. Now, normally on founding, the company is worth hardly anything, so it sort of doesn't matter. You can put in $100 each and each get you sell your shares at 0.0001 cents per share. You put in $100 and you get your a million shares or whatever it is. But that is really the process which is used to acquire shares. Is the process of acquiring shares is a purchase of shares. Now, if a company gives you shares, then legally they haven't given you the shares. Legally, they've given you the money that you turned around and reinvested to buy the shares. Now, it's really messy because there's no record of you having paid for the shares. But understand that when you are given shares, you are not being given shares, you are being given money. And the reason why this matters is when your business launches, you can say, hey, until the founders came in, the business is worth nothing. So we're going to start off with $1,000 in the bank account, and the company's worth $1,000. So I paid $600 for my 60% of the shares. Good on me. The problem then arises if you raise money from an outside investor, and you raise money from an outside investor who values the company at $2 million. All of a sudden, your $600 worth of shares are worth not the $600 you paid for them, they're worth $1.1 million or whatever it may be. So if so at the beginning, the shares were worth nothing. It didn't matter if anyone was given them. But after you've received money from anyone else who valued the company, if you turned around and said, oh, here's a new co-founder who we want to give them 10% of the shares. Well, you have just given them the equivalent of $200,000 worth of money. And they then have to declare that $200,000 as income on their income tax and pay taxes to the government on $200,000 worth of income, which you don't have the cash to pay the income tax on. Therefore, you don't want the shares. So because of this, shares are easy to buy at the beginning. Everyone starts with shares, but once the company's already received money from outside investors who put a value on the company, you then flip over to having options. Because in most countries, the options, when they are granted, are considered to have zero value. If they are out of the money options, you have to be sure you have to grant options to buy shares in the company at more than the current at the same or more than the current value of the company. Now, the thing about options is there is a bit of a cap on options. Most shareholders do not like to see more than 15, so between 10 to 20% of the company issued in options wherever you are. So whatever you get wrong in the beginning with your shareholding, it's really hard to change afterwards. So the initial split of shares really, really matters because, yeah, you can't really change it afterwards by giving people shares. Doesn't exist. You're giving them money, which is taxable, which they're reinvesting for shares. You can't change things afterwards except on the margin with options, because if you can only ever have a total of 15% of the company issued in options and you plan to have future team members join, well, then those future team members are going to take up 5-10% of those options, and you've only got 5-10% left for rebalancing between founders. So you are making a decision up front on how to distribute shares in your company, not knowing the future. And the big thing about not knowing the future is it takes much longer than you expect for your business to succeed. Every VC will tell you 99% of the time, it takes longer, it takes more money to succeed than you expect. Call it 95% of the time. 5% of the time, you're pleasantly surprised. And it's like, oh my God, this is so much easier and so much faster than I expected. But that is very, very much the minority. Most of the time, it takes much longer. And so the way you get around this problem of, hey, we're doing shares up front, not knowing who's going to contribute to the company, who's even going to stay in the company, is you get around that with vesting. You allow people to buy their shares at the beginning. And the way a standard vesting agreement is you allow the company the right to buy back shares from people when they leave the company. And that right is to buy back the shares at the initial price you paid for them. And you're paying a fraction, pennies per share, the fraction of pennies per share. So therefore, you really don't want those sold back. And the concept of vesting is you earn them over time. So if you have 4-year vesting, which is standard, and you leave after 2 years, you keep 50% of the shares. 50% of the shares can be bought back by the company for what you paid for them. Now, it is industry standard to have 4-year vesting. There is a massive problem with 4-year vesting. I just told you it takes longer than you expect. I have seen so many cases where the company is 2 years in, is really struggling, still has pretty close to zero revenues, has a bit of a product, and not much else, and one of the founders wants to leave. And at that point, the founder who's leaving, they're saying, oh, but I get to keep half my shares. And I've seen INSEAD founded companies with INSEAD co-founders break down because of this. And the company went bankrupt because the founder who was leaving said, we had vesting. I'm leaving 2 years in. I get to keep half my shares. And the other founders said, oh my God, this is totally unfair. You're leaving just when it gets hard. And all of a sudden, I'm supposed to allow you to keep half your shares when you've done virtually nothing and the business is virtually nowhere. And if I build into something amazing in the next 5 years, you still get half your shares for only 2 years' work. So although industry average is 4 years, when Michael and I launched Loyal, we did 8-year vesting. So, and anybody who gets shares in our firm, we do 8-year vesting on, just because it takes longer. And the whole point is try to predict ahead of time what's going to be fair. And, if people are leaving 2 years in, it feels a heck of a lot fairer that they've only vested a quarter of their shares than that they vested half their shares. So that's what we do. You can choose whatever you want for vesting. But the whole point of this is to try to get as fair as possible a contribution of shares. Fairness comes down to two things. There's how much time you spend working on the business, and there's three things. There's how much time you spend working on the business, and there's how much money you're being paid for the time you spend working on the business, and there's the amount of value that you contribute. Now, there is a sort of convention in dispensing shares initially that everyone says, oh, we all get an equal amount of shares. That's the fair thing to do. Well, look, you may feel fair right now, but if you fast forward 3 years and you've got somebody who's senior from the industry, who's been the CEO and has raised all the money and has brought in 70% of the customers, and you've got another person on the team who has been working equally hard, but who is more junior, has been handling marketing, has done a good job at the marketing, but really, honestly, their contribution to the company has been less. The person who's contributed more value will start to feel hard done by. And they'll start to go, well, hold on a second. This business would be nowhere without me. That other person without me, this business would have failed. And then you start to get resentment building up. It is far better to address that topic up front by getting the shares distributed in a equitable manner where the likely contribution of value is recognized in the share split. Look, I mean, And by the way, so I think a 50-50 split, for instance, between two co-founders is horrible. But if you want to go to the other extreme, if you look at the sort of the top founded companies in the world, you should never really go beyond about a 70-30 split. And I mean, you can look at things like Apple with Wozniak and um, I can't remember his name right now. But if you go and look at companies like that, the worst split you've seen, or the sort of the most unequal split you've ever seen, is about a 70-30 split. So you should expect the splits to range somewhere between 50-50 and 70-30, and just really try to reflect the relative value that people bring to the business there. The other thing to watch out for when assigning shares is, so I said there's the three things that matter. There's the relative value. There's how much cash you're being paid. And look, uh, as far as I'm concerned, there are people who are doing it for cash and people who are doing it for equity. Now, you can actually sit down and see what the equity is worth by saying, hey, if I've got a company which is worth 2 million and I've got 40% of the shares of a company worth 2 million, so I've got, call it $800,000 worth of equity, and I'm vesting an eighth of that per year because I'm on an 8-year vesting, well, then I'm vesting the equivalent of $100,000 a year in shares. So you can actually just look at the shares and how much is vesting per year and get a sense very much of what that person is being paid for their time. But you need to just, the second someone's getting cash and not equity, I really split things into, they're the people who are the founders who are compensated mainly through equity, who should all be paid roughly equally. And that is likely zero at the beginning. And then it's going to be, call it $2,000 a month. It's going to be barely enough to cover your rent, if that, and nothing more. Um, and somebody who is sort of saying, hey, I need $6,000 a month to cover my living expenses, to pay my kids' education, etc. If you are someone who is going to be the, hey, I need my $6,000 a month, well, great. But all of a sudden, you should be getting paid. You should receive a very different amount of equity because you don't have the risk. You don't take the risk. You're doing cash. So make sure you compensate properly there. And then it's like, okay, great. You're all founders. You get equal amount. Oh, whatever it is. The last thing to mention there is I said there's also it is the amount of value you contribute. It is the amount of salary you're being paid. It's the amount of time you're working in the company. And there are many, many people who will say, look, I want to go work at McKinsey, and I'm going to take my salary from McKinsey and reinvest in the company, and I'll do it part-time, evenings, weekends, whatever. And I'm going to be working almost as much as the rest of you. First of all, I'll be working 20 hours a week, or I'll be working 30 or 40 hours a week because I'll do that on top of my McKinsey. And I'm not married. I've got time on the weekends, whatever. The truth is, okay, you think, oh, I'm working 20, 30 hours a week. Well, guess what? The full-time founder of a company who's doing nothing else is working more like 60 hours a week. I've met very few founders who work 40 hours a week. So your time is not worth your 20 hours, and you're probably not going to struggle to do more than 20 hours. Your 20 hours is not half the contribution of someone else's time. It is more like a third to a quarter of their contribution. So the way you get around that is you can say, look, I'm full-time somewhere else. You guys are full-time on the business. The way you reflect, but you then have to say, am I intending to go full-time in a year or two? Then great, we'll set up the equity split in a way that is fair when we're all full-time. But if the normal people are vesting at on 8-year vesting or a 6-year vesting, whatever you decide, then your vesting when you're only working 20 hours and they're all working 60 plus hours should actually be a third to a quarter of their vesting rate. So you can start off and each of you gets sort of one gets 60, one gets 40, but the person on the 40, their vesting is not 6-year or 8-year vesting. It becomes 18, 20-year vesting, and then it'll change back to the normal vesting rate as soon as you go full time. So that's the way to handle that. Um, yeah. It is really important to get the vesting in place, by the way, and to get it right, because it is very hard to change in the future, and you should expect people to leave. And you want everyone to all feel happy that the people who leave were treated fairly. They have some vested shares for their initial work, and but they haven't vested too many shares. There's still the people who are staying to build out the company have more shares after things have executed. Um, Two other things to watch out for, and then I'll throw it open for questions. I talked about trying to be fair. Look, you're doing the best you can to be fair, knowing that it'll be inherently unfair at the end. But try the best you can to get it right so there is minimal resentment. And once you've agreed on a share split and you've agreed on your vesting, just you sort of have to accept for the rest of the company, for now,
Oh, this
for
is the, I
eternity,
think this is the NDA,
it's
so
about
I
what it's
agree
going to
with that.
be. You're unlikely going to be able to change that, or you'll make
I
tweaks around
agree
the margin,
with
like I
that.
mentioned, with the 5 or 10% of options,
so
but
this
that'll
is
be about it.
30,000. So it's
Um,
30 days,
I'll just mute
right?
Shrinal here, who I think is talking. Um, and then the other thing about unfair, really watch out. There are investors, there are acquirers who will say, oh, those people who left in the past are no longer contributing to the company. I want to wash them off the balance sheet. I want to ensure in an acquisition that all the money goes to the people who stay, none of it goes to the early employees, etc. And the flip side, if you are the person who's staying, if you have good vesting in place, really um, you get to choose who funds your company or who acquires your company and on what terms. And you really need to be ready to push back and protect everyone. If you were unhappy about the vesting in the first place, you aren't going to want to do that. But if you were really fair about the vesting, you were really happy about it up front, then you are going to be in a position where you feel right and have really a moral obligation to stand up for the people who left early, who contributed to get the company to where it was, but are not there at that later point. Sorry, that was a lot longer than 5 minutes as an intro, but I hope it covered the basics. And I'm happy to throw it across to you, Akansh, first for your questions and then to everyone for theirs.
Okay, perfect. No, thank you so much for that. That's actually, I think, extremely useful. And I think we got, or for me personally, got more out of those 10, 15 minutes than I would say from other sources. So truly appreciate your time in putting that together. A question that I have is something that is new to me that's being proposed at INSEAD as I tried to figure out how much equity to issue and who to issue it to and how to vest is a simple term sheet versus a milestone based term sheet for part-time founders, or I don't want to
Yes.
call them founders, for part-time team members,
Yep.
be it either as a fractional CFO or a fractional CTO. So in your experience, especially like having seen startups come out of INSEAD and you know the sort of profile of people that tend to come, like what have you seen? What do you recommend? What do VCs like and not like?
So let me talk first about what's good for the company and then circle back to what VCs like or don't like. Because VCs don't always like what's good for the company. In my view, always is you're trying to build a company and do what's best for the company, and the VCs can just deal with it. You do what's best for the company. Because you want to succeed. What's the point of trying to please investors and then failing? Which, by the way, is a really important point to remember when investors are giving you advice about your business. Uh, you, I don't care what your investors told you to do. The number one underlying message is make sure you succeed with the business. And you never want to be in a situation where you go, I just talked to a founder with this, by the way, who said her number one regret, her business has just failed. And her number one regret is that she had a strong vision for the business and it's not her investors didn't see the same vision. So she ran her business the way the investors told her to do it instead of the way she wanted it. And it's failed now. And her regret was that she didn't follow her vision because she thought her vision would have succeeded. So always remember that. Um, so uh, milestone based things. I think it's totally fine to have a fraction of the equity vesting based on milestones. And remember what I said about it's going to take a long time, longer than you expect to get your business to succeed. And if you do milestone-based fund, and so you can do milestone, the problem with the milestone-based is you can really only set milestones for the next year and a half. So if you're doing milestone things based for the next year and a half, but the business is going to be 6, 8, 10, 12 years. I mean, look, your average business takes a minimum of 10 years to exit. It used to be 6, 7 years to exit. And now we're talking sort of 10, 12, 14 years to exit. So um, having all the equity assigned based on milestones in the first year and a half when you're going through a long period, it's hard to get those set up in a way that it'll be fair in the end. Now, milestones are a great idea when you aren't talking about someone who's going to be a core founder with the business forever, but you're talking about someone who's like a hired gun CTO who's going to come in and build the first version of the product and may be gone in a year and a half. And in that case, the fact that they actually built that first version of the product is fine. And if they're only getting 5% of the equity, for instance, then that's totally fine. The 5% of the equity is going to vest over milestones over what they do in the first 2 years. And then hallelujah, but you're talking about the vesting of 5% of the equity, not 40% of the equity. So yeah, I would consider milestones for a small contributor with a relatively small amount of equity or for a portion of your equity. If you're doing milestone based, really the only way to do milestone based, it depends if you're ever going to raise money into your business. If you don't expect to raise any money in the first 2 years, and you can rejig by issuing people new shares all along because your shares are still only worth fractions of a penny per share. And by the way, remember, it isn't just that your shares are worth fractions of pennies per share. You have to convince the government of wherever you live that when you received shares in a company which is a year and a half old, those shares were only worth $300. They were worth $300,000. So do remember that you need to be able to prove it to the government. But so you can do some grants as you go. There is some risk on sort of government taxation if you're being given shares. The other way to do it, and probably the smarter way to do it, is to simply have milestones to be hit. And you have vesting, which is, okay, great. You started with a bunch of shares. You didn't hit these milestones in a year and a half. All right, company can buy back X% of your shares at the price you paid for them. And that would be a way to handle it via shares. Now, of course, if it's via options, then you can just give people some options and you'll cancel options, which again, you can say a certain amount of options cancel upon XYZ.
Okay, thank you for that. So I think just one more question for me, and then I'll open it
Sure.
up because I'm sure other people have questions, and I can come back and then. I mean, you talked about like a 4-year vesting versus an 8-year vesting.
Yes.
You talked about people not understanding or realizing that it's going to take longer than we think it will for a company
Yeah.
to actually succeed or potentially have an opportunity to succeed. What are the common mistakes you see in early stage cap tables that we should keep an eye out for? Because you've talked about, using vesting as a means to sort of account for that. Yeah. Is there anything else you see?
Sure.
Yeah.
What other investors, and I said, let's circle back to the way VCs think, what other investors, not loyal, think is there is a concept of dead equity on the cap table. And that dead equity is shares owned by early angel investors, shares owned by founders who have left. So if too big a share of the company is in the hands of founders that have left, a VC will not want to fund the company, or they will force really nasty deal terms on the company, which are basically screwing all the early people so that they're looking after the existing ones. So your way to avoid that being forced on you in the future is to do and like I say, I think 4-year vesting is not enough, and you'll end up with debt equity on your cap table, and you will have people. But the thing is, if you've got like I said, we do 8-year vesting. If you've got 8-year vesting, then your debt equity will be a much smaller percentage of the cap table. And the other investors who are coming in, you especially as a remaining founder can be like, no, 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 we're looking after these people, we're not screwing them over. And by the way, what objection do you have? Because the fraction of the company they own is small enough that I'm still highly motivated. We, the people, the team who are here, is still highly motivated. So that's one mistake. I'm just trying to think of other mistakes I see on a cap table. Most VCs aren't sophisticated enough to understand that sort of like an all equal share split may lead to resentment in the team, may lead to the team breaking down in the future. So they won't recognize that. Some people may go, okay, well, when there's a 50-50 co-founder split, they may have some objections over that. But again, most investors aren't sophisticated enough to understand that there's a problem with that. Good.
Got it. Thank you.
Sorry, Ria?
Yeah, you got that right. Okay, so I love your frankness. In fact, when you were talking about the founder who has that regret that they wish they'd stuck to their vision, I have a very similar story. I had VCs come in and they told me that there was an acquisition offer on the table. They were like, go get acquired, but the acquirer had a completely different idea of how to run the business, and I had to walk away from the company ultimately. My question for you is that early on to build, at least for first-time founders, a lot of times to build credibility, you bring in a lot of advisors, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what kind of equity should be given to advisors, if any, and what kind of relationship should one have with advisors to actually make it valuable?
So we have, thankfully, there's a group out there called Founder Institute, who, by the way, is the other way to get in. If you're not an INSEAD founder, you can get into Loyal by doing the Founder Institute program and being with the top grads from that program. And they've put out this thing called the FAST Agreement, which is, and look, Founder Institute has worked with tens of thousands of startups. And they developed this little FAST agreement. And whether you use the FAST agreement or not, it's got standard amounts of equity you give people for different types of contributions and based on how far along your company is. There are a big mistake many people do is they have one of these early advisors comes along, and the advisor themselves may even say, hey, yeah, I'm happy to lend my name to this. I'm happy to be part of this. I expect 5% of the equity. And if you will look at the FAST agreement, you will see that the amounts of equity granted to advisors are between 0.1% and 1%. Never over 1%, and then 1% only for someone really involved in an early stage business. And look, there are some of those advisors who you're just going to have to say no to or understand that you're giving them a disproportionate amount of the company and it'll look bad later. Because the other truth is about most advisors, and this is as much on the company as the advisor, is most advisors don't add that much value to the company. And they don't add that much value to the company often because you get busy doing your work and you don't think of involving them. And they're just sitting there, oh, okay, I've got my shares, they're vesting anyway. I talked about 8-year vesting. It is standard for advisors to have vesting happening over a 2-year period rather than an 8-year period, because most advisor relationships, you'll tend to use up that person and their contacts and really get contributions through them over a 2-year period. And you're giving them a small amount of equity. So if you're giving them 0.5% of the equity vesting over 2 years, they're only vesting 0.25% a year. And then if you want to keep them involved afterwards, you can do a new equity grant, probably a lower percentage because your company should be more valuable by then, to then keep them re-engaged. But those are the sorts of numbers. Use the FAST agreement. It's a great guidance to use. It's useful also as a negotiating tool. And then understand that there are some advisors who just walk around and they get 5% of the company here, 5% of the company there. They don't earn their value, earn their keep as a general rule, but you get to decide that. It's your business. you'll get all sorts of advice and rules, and it's your business. You get to do what you want. You can ignore. I often tell our founders 60-70% of what I say is brilliant. Follow it to the letter. 30-40% will be wrong. In your case, do the opposite. Don't assume because one person's got gray hair and has done this, seen a few things, doesn't mean he knows everything about your business and how it'll work. The same reason you should ignore your VC.
Thank you. Thank you for that.
You're welcome. Romain.
Hi, thank you, Kamal. I think you answered quite a bit of these, but just to go back on this to make sure I got this right. You mentioned a few red flags in the distribution between the founders and in terms of equity split and everything. But do you see any specific patterns or dynamics in the founders that we need to be careful about, like people trying
Yes.
to engage too much? Is there anything you can reflect on, please?
Yeah.
Thank you.
The number one dynamic you see, and we as founders will say this as a red flag, is I will get off a call with a company and I'll say to my co-managing partner at Loyal, I'll say, gee, that company's in trouble. The CTO wants to be the CEO. So the first thing you need to understand is there is a single CEO for a business. The way everything's legally set up, there is a legal delegation of powers from the board to the CEO, who is then responsible for hiring and firing the team. And the second you make two people responsible rather than one person responsible, there is finger pointing. There is not a pure delegation of powers. By the way, lots of people want to be the CEO. It sucks to be the CEO of an early stage startup. And the two biggest reasons it sucks is, and they're related to each other, is it comes back to investors. The investors will hire and fire the CEO. They will not replace a CMO, a CTO, etc. The only person the investors will replace is the CEO, who will then perhaps turn around to the team and move people around and hire their own people, whatever else. But by being the CEO, your neck is on the line. You're taking a lot more risk. The second related thing is, again, the investors. Investors only want to talk to the CEO, which means instead of doing actual useful things for your business, you're running around fundraising, sort of babysitting investors, spending anything related to investors, you're taking the lead on because they only want to talk to the person who hires and fires because that's the person who is going to sit on they're going to sit on the board with responsible for. So really understand that if you want to contribute to the progress of the business, by being the CEO, you are reducing your ability to actually make a real difference in the business as soon as you start fundraising, going out to people. So your neck's on the line. You can't do the work you want to do. You got to babysit investors. So then decide among you who actually wants to be the CEO. And the CEO should get a couple percentage points more of the shares just because they're sort of because of the added risk in their job. But that is the number one mistake, is people saying, I want to be a co-CEO. A good CEO will consult with their team. And a good CEO will consult with their team and then understand exactly what I said earlier about whether you should listen to me or not. A good CEO will consult with their team and then do what they think is right for the business, knowing that their neck is on the line. They're the one fired if the business doesn't succeed. But they should be consulting with you anyway. And hopefully, if you're co-founders together, you have this arrangement and agreement where you will discuss things as a group. And then you trust the person who is running the company to be someone you will delegate that final decision to. So yeah, so that is the number one mistake I see, is just a lack of clarity around who is leading the company and a desire of people to want the power and trappings of being a CEO without understanding how much of a poison chalice it is to actually have to be that CEO.
Okay, understood. So
and of course, sorry.
No, I was about to summarize by it's important to make sure you've got the right split in equity, but on top of that, make sure you've got the right split in tasks or roles altogether. Yes. It's not only one or the other, but the two together.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you.
Rhea?
So I wanted to understand, I know you said that you guys had an 8-year or have an 8-year vesting period, and you
Yes.
recommend that because it takes a lot longer to build a business, you should have a longer vesting period, especially for co-founders.
Yes.
So in my case, we had a 7-year vesting period.
Perfect.
But at the same time, we were one of those that did actually become quite popular and quite successful and were growing very rapidly and even got an acquisition offer. And and ultimately when I left, like I had to forfeit most of my shares. So
Sorry, why did you have to forfeit most of your shares when you left? How long had you been working at the business?
because I made a horrible mistake of splitting equity 50-50. And there were a lot of issues because whatever decision I tried to take, my co-founder would rebuttal that and not let the company move forward. So ultimately, I just decided, okay, you know what, like I'm just gonna leave. It's fine. So
Thank you for being the object lesson for everyone else. Please listen to her.
yeah. In fact, Akanksh was there to tell me, like the day I was splitting equity, he was there and he was like, oh, don't split equity 50-50, do 51-49. Even if you guys trust each other a lot, just do 51-49. And I was like, no, it's fine. 50-50 is fine. I was dumb. But I think my question is, do you think along with the vesting period being 7 years, which I think is fair, do you think there should also be milestones that allow founders to get their equity in case, let's say 4 years, 5 years down the line, their role has become redundant, but they did contribute and they want to exit the company? Do you think founders should have that option?
So the other part of having 8-year vesting, if you're going to keep things fair, because you're signing up front, not knowing what's going to be fair later on, if you can see 4 or 5 years in that there's someone who's becoming redundant, you have to be willing to have the awkward conversation to fire somebody. So you have to be willing to just go, if I don't fire this person, then the share split will become unfair because they are continuing to invest a large amount every year, yet their contributions drop to virtually zero. So no, I don't think the milestones are needed. Well, the milestones are needed as a crutch for people who are not willing to have the awkward conversations. And there is a saying in startups, which is hire slow, fire fast. But you just can't afford to avoid, your business will fail if you aren't willing to do what is right for the business. And what is right for the business is not to have massive vesting to someone who is no longer contributing. Now, you may want them to continue in an advisory role, but if you don't expect them to ever come back, you have to have them leave the company, and then you can grant them a small amount of their shares vesting per year for the ongoing advisory business support as if they were an advisor rather than. But yeah, it's again, you're trying to do milestones today for what's going to happen in the business 5 years from now. That's just, we don't know what the business will look like in 5 years. So that's my easy answer. I mean, you can try to figure out milestones if you've got really good at forecasting or sort of have a crystal ball. Good on you. I just find it very hard to do milestones that far in the future.
Okay.
I'm curious, by the way, which professor at INSEAD is the one talking about sort of equity being done based on milestones?
There's no professor. It's more of just the word. I think because people tend to have full-time jobs, at least in the executive program. And so what they're looking for is exactly the example you gave, which is you work at a McKinsey or a large firm and you think you can put in 10, 20 hours and you want to compare that to what a full-time founder is doing. And so the way that's being proposed, at least to me, is to have some milestones that we adhere to, which I'm not comfortable with for exactly the reasons you laid out, because it's hard to see beyond a year out for me, at least.
Yeah.
because we don't know what's going to happen. So I was curious to know if like other companies you'd seen. Actually, it's a good segue. And for anybody else, if you guys have questions, I think Kamal, are you okay with one or two more questions people have?
Yeah, I'm actually good until 11 o'clock, so I can do
Okay.
next 17 minutes.
Perfect. I think what would be helpful is you've had a lot of experience with startups that have come directly out of the INSEAD venture competition. There's a fair number of people on this call that I know will be participating in the next IVC.
Yep.
The IVC is fantastic as a competition in terms of the advisors that they give us. I learned a lot through the process, but where I think they dropped the ball a little is they ask you to have these equity conversations where not everybody's on the same page because not everybody's run a startup before. So my question to you is, when these companies come out of the IVC to you, what are the equity splits that you're seeing, or are you seeing the same people that won the IVC actually continue? Are you seeing something different? Do you advise them? Like, what have you seen and what do you recommend? I know it's a repeat, so I think some of the points you touched upon.
So by the way, we get relatively few people coming out of the IVC to us. And by the way, if you win the IVC, we offer you funding. And there's a number of the teams where it's like, hey, Loyal's offered you funding. Just come to incorporate a business and come to us. And they just never incorporate the business and come to us because often, and what happens is 6 people want to do the business and 2 of them end up doing it. The other 4 don't. So, look, have the brutal conversation, really understand, do a long vesting period, and do an extra long vesting period. Your vesting time drops, your vesting rate drops to a third or a quarter if you're employed full time somewhere else. And all of those things should take care of things that naturally the cap table will balance itself out. So. But yeah, the biggest thing I've seen in IVC is people all want to do the business, then the reality of life without a salary kicks in, and most of the people don't want to stay in the business. And the ones who do want to do it full time are less motivated because they feel so much of the shares in the hand of people who aren't contributing. So then they're saying, why am I going full time when if I stayed part time, I would get almost as much as they get, or I get as much as everyone else, therefore, and I only get a little bit more for going full time. So that's probably the biggest problem, is that full time, part time.
Yeah, the full time to part time, that makes sense. Do other people have questions? It
Sorry,
doesn't
there's
necessarily
Pavan. Pavan has his hand up.
Hey there, hey Kamal. I just missed the first part. Please excuse me if this question get already answered. In a small startup, is it possible that founders holding majority of the shares and letting other people take the CEO and CTO positions? If so, how to structure that?
So it is very normal
Mhm.
in a later stage company for them to have the founders still have 25% of the shares split between them, say 10 and 15%, and a hired gun CEO comes in to run things who only has 7%, because of course your options at that point, they can't get shares, they can only get options, and your options are limited to 15% of the company. So your new CEO comes in and takes 5 to 7% of those because you need some for other people. So that is a very normal end game to end up in. It is highly unusual to see that at the beginning. So if you're very far along and you end up there, wonderful. It's because you're successful, you're growing, you've got money from other people, etc. If you're at the beginning and you're saying, hey, I have the idea and I'm a founder and I want 30%, and I'm going to bring a CEO in to run it, and the CEO is only going to have 5 or 10%, then at the beginning, when so much value is being created, it'll look really strange to have a CEO who's not contributing significantly. Are you thinking about at the very beginning? Or are you thinking about a later on stage, Pavan?
Maybe later on stage. Initially, we want to manage it by ourselves, but later on, we just want to keep the structure flat and bring someone else from outside.
Yeah. So look, if you're going to do that at a later period, then that's totally normal, and you will be just understand that right now one or the other of you is going to have to play that CEO role
Yeah.
and have all that time away from the business.
Yeah. Yeah. Fair. Makes
Yeah.
sense. Thank you. Thank you, Kamal.
Welcome. Any other questions? Akansh, I don't know if you have any on your list there. Feel free to go ahead.
Yeah, I can go through my list. I think maybe something that's a good segue again and for people who were not able to attend your talk on campus. So there's something that I think is very unique to Loyal in terms of I haven't seen any other VC actually offer something like this, but you offer a 10K safe with the option for a 200K follow on in the subsequent funding rounds as well. Maybe you could talk a little bit about that because there is, again, like I said, most of the people
Sure.
here are either working on their startups or looking to transition to work on their startups.
So Loyal tries to make the first check too good to be true. So basically, we start with $10,000. Why would anyone take $10,000 from an investor? It's because of everything else we give you. And everything else we give you includes we have a network of over 1,000 advisors around the world that you have immediate access to. And it doesn't matter how much we have invested in your business, you have full access to that advisor network. The $10,000 we put in, we'll put it in on whatever valuation, whatever terms. As safe is often what people take, but we'll put common shares. We don't really care what terms that money goes in at. We want to make it easy for you to take that first 10,000. We don't make money on $10,000 investments. We make money on $200,000 investments, and we just follow this process of getting to know you over time rather than judging you based on a pitch. And we're only going to take 1 in 200 people who pitch to us based on who has the best pitch. We think it's much fairer to put money into a bunch of companies and judge you based on the ongoing getting to know you over time. So that is the way we work. I'm trying to think of what else is in there, but it's we only source from 3 networks. You have to have a founder who is an INSEAD alumnus, working full time in the business. If you're an INSEAD part-time founder and you don't want to go full time in the business yet, then we have to ask ourselves, why don't you want to be full time in the business? What's missing in the business? You want our money, but you aren't willing to go full time? No. So we want them to be full-time in the business for at least 3 months just to show that they've made that commitment. Or you can be a top graduate of the Founder Institute Accelerator. If you're an INSEAD alum, you've got relatively good odds of getting into Loyal. If you are a non-INSEAD alum, we take only the top 1% or so of the grads in the Founder Institute. But if you're a good business, a really good business, then you can rise to the top there, and we'll fund you that way. And we have about 5% of the portfolio companies who are from the portfolios of our investors in our fund who said, wow, you do such an amazing job of supporting companies. How can I get that support for one of my other portfolio companies? But those are the only 3 ways into the fund. Yeah, I'll stop there. I mean, I could talk a lot more about the fund, but let me stop there for a second. Mida, I see your hand has gone up.
Hi, thank you so much for setting this up. My question is a little bit complicated. I'm trying to figure out how to phrase it correctly, but I'm taking on a project with a university to help them spin out.
Mida, we're having problems hearing you right now. I'm going to mute you. I'm sorry, I've had to mute you. If you can unmute when you figured it out, and we'll try again. Yeah. All we hear is spin out, spin out, spin out over and over again. Maybe leave the call and come back.
Or maybe you can drop your question in the chat.
Yeah. That's true. You could stick your question in the chat. That would be great. In the interim, Pavan, I saw you had your hand up and just took it down. I guess that was for the previous question, but if you had a new question, feel free.
No, it was for the previous question. It was a mistake. Thank you.
Yeah, good. All right. Well, Mida's figuring that out. Did anyone else or did you have another question?
Yeah, sure. I mean, what tends to you give people the 10,000 or not give people qualify for the 10,000. What have you seen that leads to teams being disqualified for the next stage, if we can call it that, so people know what to think for?
So we work in a very unusual way. So most people, it's really competitive to get into the fund. And then they're really supportive, and you've got a really good chance of getting follow-on money once you're into the fund. With us, it's relatively easy if you're an INSEAD alum to get into the fund, and it's then very competitive to get the next round of funding. So we have a lot of amazing companies in our portfolio who may be raising money from other VCs, and yet we're not putting money in. And just remember that we just run a different process where it's relatively easy as INSEADers to get in, be supported by the fund, get all our resources. It is very competitive to go to the next stage. We only take the top 2% or less of our portfolio companies every month for follow-on funding. And that's just the way we run. So it is just understand in other things, it's really hard to get in. In our case, it's really hard to get to the next stage. Now, having said that, you have a 2% or so chance to move from any one stage to the next. That is on a monthly basis. So if you're in our portfolio for 20 months and you've got a 1.5 to 2% chance of moving on to the next stage every month, at the end of 20 months, you've got a 30 to 40% chance of moving on. So it's actually, we do see about that level ultimately should be moving on from one stage to the next. It's just very unpredictable when that'll happen.
I'm not sure if Mita's back, but
Oh, there we are. Here's the question. So Amita has posted, I'm taking on a project with the university to help spit out in medtech with the goal to become the CEO co-founder working towards MVP with early founders who will likely become part-time. When should I negotiate equity, before or during the spin out? Honestly, I would be negotiating equity you should be negotiating equity as soon as the company is incorporated, because equity is assigned when the company is incorporated. If the company is not yet incorporated, then you should have a preliminary conversation, because I would never start a job where someone said to me, I said, what's my salary? And they go, oh, well, we'll figure out your salary later. Just work here for a while. And if you wouldn't do anything without the figure out your salary, going to work here for a while. Don't work for a business where they say, oh, just work with us. We'll figure out your equity later. It's like, no, get agreement on what it'll be, but they may not be able to grant the equity until the company is actually incorporated. Two mistakes to watch out for with spinouts from universities. One is some universities are very greedy and they try to take too much of the, I mean, your salary is set, but your equity isn't set. So you want to figure that out. The two problems in universities, some universities are greedy. They try to take too big a percentage of the company just because I'm a university. And I mean, for good universities, many in the US who have a lot of experience at this, will be taking somewhere between 5 to 15% of the equity, but most universities shouldn't take more than 5 to 15%. The other problem you'll have is you'll have a massive problem with professors. If it's technology generated by a professor, then you have a co-founder who is guaranteed to be a part-time co-founder, not a full-time co-founder. And yet they're going to think, oh my God, I'm this amazing person. I should have 40% of the shares for co-founding it when you're only going to get a fraction of my time because I'm part of 15 other companies. And it's like, and I have a day job. So just really get clear on that and really make sure that besides the university, the professor themselves is getting a fair amount for their contribution. And oh, by the way, if they have more than 5 or 10% of the company, then you want time from them every week. And it's like, okay, you're going to have more than 10%. You're a real co-founder. I need committed time. You got teaching, you've got research, you've got all this other stuff. If you are not going to give me this time, if you are not going to go and speak for me, introductions for me, pull your network for me, if you're not going to do all these things to help the business, then don't take such a big percentage of the equity. So that's the other stuff to watch out for. More question.
I had a question, if I may, if no one
Please,
else.
Stephanie.
You mentioned out of the 9,000 advisors that help your startups, I'm curious, how many do it on a like monthly basis, and any of them would have a percentage that you mentioned earlier? Sometimes advisors do get a small share of equity. Is it the case that it might be also a paid, I guess, advisory role?
So we have over 1,000 advisors. I think it's like 1,400 advisors right now. The deal with the advisors is the advisors are compensated by getting a share of the profits from us. As a VC, we get this stuff called carry, which is a percent of the profits we make our investors. We share that carry with the advisors who helped the company who generated the carry. So it's sort of very much a merit basis there. The deal we have with our advisors is you need to spend, because we're sharing profits with you, don't take anything for the first 20 hours you spend with any company. Don't talk about money for the first 10 hours you spend with any company. If you spend at least 10 hours then, and it looks like it's tracking to be a lot more than 20, then of course you should do an agreement directly with the company. But the deal for the advisors is you have 1,400 people, including some really amazing people who are potentially really useful to your business, who are available effectively for free to you for the first 10 to 20 hours that you spend with them.
Thank you.
Welcome. Okay. Akansh, any last words?
Well, just thank you so much for your time. Genuinely appreciate it because I know you're a busy man, and it's been super helpful. Thank you for everybody that showed up. Thank you to everybody that showed up as well. Hope it was as useful for you guys as it was for me. And yeah, I think everybody knows how to get in touch with you, Kamal. But do you want to drop your email or let people know if they have additional questions, or if they want to work with Loyal.vc, or if they want to see if they're eligible for to be a part
so
of
look, if you want to know if you're eligible or not, just go to loyal.vc. It's all there on our website. My email is kamal@loyal.vc. If you actually want to get into the portfolio, Cassidy is the woman who will help you through that. And her email is Cassidy@loyal.vc. And if you email me, I'll just say, go to the website and talk to Cassidy, because I do get involved in the process, but just at the very end of the process. So in the interim, so if you're interested in that, please do go ahead there. And yeah, glad this was helpful.
All right, thank you so much.
Okay.
Thank you. Goodbye.